When we talk about income inequality, we often think about the gap between rich and poor within a country. But what happens if we look at the whole world as one big society? That's where things get really interesting. Economists usually use three main concepts to understand global inequality, each one giving us a different view of how wealth is spread across nations and people. Imagine lining up all countries and looking only at their average income, without caring how big or small each country is. The first concept, the unweighted international inequality, shows how far apart these average incomes are and how that distance changes over time. If the gap shrinks, we talk about convergence, countries becoming more equal. If it widens, it's divergence. Here, every country counts the same, no matter if it's China with over 1 billion people or Luxembourg with just a few 100,000. In this concept, we assume that everyone inside each country earns exactly the national average income. Of course, that's not realistic, but it helps us look at income differences between countries rather than within them. Now, let's make it a bit more accurate. In the second concept, the population-weighted international inequality, we give more weight to countries with more people. That means every person on Earth is counted, but they get assigned the average income of their own country. So, China and India suddenly play a much bigger role. This gives us a clearer picture of inequality in the real world because it reflects how people are distributed across nations. But again, it still assumes that within each country, everyone earns the same amount. Finally, the third concept, the true global inequality, goes one step further. It doesn't assume equal incomes within countries. Instead, it looks directly at individual income data, household by household, person by person, across the entire world. This approach removes national borders completely. Everyone is placed into one single global income distribution. It's the most realistic picture of personal inequality, but also the hardest to calculate, because it requires massive amounts of data from every country. And that's a real challenge. The number of countries changes over time, currencies need to be converted, and prices differ from one place to another. Only since the late 1980s do we have enough reliable household data to even try measuring this kind of global inequality. What do the numbers actually show? Global income inequality isn't simple, and depending on how it's measured, the trend can look very different. Let us start with the unweighted international measure. Here, every country counts the same, no matter its size. With this method, inequality rose steadily from 1950 to the early 1990s and reached its peak around the year 2000, driven in part by globalization. Only after that point did the gap begin to shrink, as poorer countries started catching up. Still, looking at the full timeline, inequality today remains higher than it was in 1950, even if it's been falling since 2000. The picture changes once population is included. In this weighted version, China matters more than Sweden and India more than Norway. Population-weighted inequality was extremely high in the 1950s, then dipped slightly and stayed fairly stable for decades. But in the late 1990s, it began rising again, peaking around 2000, just like the first measure, but at a much higher level. Then, everything flipped. After 2000, inequality dropped sharply and moved much closer to the unweighted level. Why did this shift happen? Because countries like China and India, the world's most populous nations, experienced extraordinary income growth. China, for example, started from a very low level in the 1980s, but over the next few decades, its economy expanded at a remarkable pace, lifting average incomes dramatically. Meanwhile, incomes in wealthy countries like the United States and Germany grew much more slowly. This meant that poorer countries were gradually catching up, a clear sign of convergence. Now let's look at the third concept, true global inequality. Not country averages, real people, real incomes. Because it uses household data, we can only calculate it from the mid-1980s onward. When we compare people's actual incomes, global inequality appears much higher than the others. But even here, the trend is downward. From the early 2000s to 2018, global inequality fell by several Gini points. So what does all of this mean? The story of global inequality isn't a straight line. Depending on the metric, the world can look more equal or less. When each country is weighted equally, inequality rose for decades, then finally began to fall. When population is taken into account, the world has become significantly more equal, driven mostly by growth in Asia. And when individuals are compared directly, levels are still high, but for the first time in modern history, the overall trend is downward. But not everywhere, and not for everyone. Want to go deeper? If you're curious how these measures are actually calculated, from Gini coefficients to Lorenz curves to income percentiles, check out the previous video. Because once you understand how the data works, you can see both the power and the limits of these numbers. Next, Econary. Think wisely, evolve quickly, understand profoundly.